Hi, in this video, we want to take a look at appending data in R. All right, so when I say appending data, let's say I have two data sets, and one way to combine them is to basically put one on top of the other. So this is when we have two data sets that have the same columns of data. So let's say I have two data sets, one's for January, one's for February. And I just want to put them together like this, treat them as one big data set. Or maybe I have a data set, all of the same columns for each individual month. And then I want to just combine them into one big data set for the year. Well, I would just be stacking the data. I put the data frames on top of each other. All right, so the other way that we can append is when we put data like this. And so in that situation, we're doing column binds, and we're saying that the row location corresponds to the ID variable. But first, let's talk about stacking the data. In R, so when I want to do this, I want to stack my data. I want to put one data frame on top of the others, and I have the same column of data, same field of data in the corresponding positions. There's two major ways to do this. There are other ways in R, but these are the big ones. So the dplyr, using the bind rows function, and rbind, which is in the base R. Okay, my recommendation is that you should use dplyr for this purpose. Most of the time, it's faster. It's less likely to change properties of your data. The exception to that, I find that sometimes it's going to fight with you. dplyr does things to make sure that you don't screw things up that you don't intend to change. But there's times where this is just a problem. So let's say that I have a character in one data set of a field. It's recorded as a character and it's recorded as a number in another one. dplyr will fight with me on this one because I'm trying to have two different data types. What rbind will do, rbind will convert them to basically the lesser version, the lesser storage format, which will be character for both of them in this situation. So my opinion is that you should use dplyr bind rows for this if possible, and if not, then use rbind. Now you could say, well, just go through and manually change. Yes, that is possible. That's a good idea. But when you start getting into like a lot of columns, it can be a pain in the neck to have to individually figure out which ones need to be changed, which ones do not. It would just be easier if the system would do it for you under the hood. All right, so now something to always remember, whenever we're doing a base R function, we need to watch out for R to convert strings to factors. Just always be mindful of it. Just kind of always keep that in the back of your mind. Whenever I use a base R function, I need to check to make sure that my strings are not interpreted as factors unless I want them to be. All right, so let's do an example. So first and foremost, I'm going to load the dplyr package using the library. And dplyr has some stuff that comes along with it. And this is just telling me, hey, there's some stuff going on some conflict with other packages, just so I know as I work through my problem. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get the data that we're going to use for the example. I'm going to go ahead and use the Star Wars data set from the dplyr package. And I'm only going to work with columns 1, 6, and 10. Then I'm just doing that to reduce it down so that this doesn't become like a super big, crazy document. So we've got name, eye color, and home world. Okay, that's our data set. And we can scroll down, we can see this. And this has, a good number of characters from the movies. All right, so what I want to do for these examples, I need to have different data sets to stack on top of each other. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to split the data by homeworld. So I'm grouping all the Star Wars characters in the data set by their home world. Okay. So when I do this, let's say that I want to take two data sets, I want to stack them on top of each other. Well, if I take the Alderaan data set and I take the Tatooine data set, I can stack them on top of each other. Oh, okay, so something I need to say. When I do a split like this, what's going to happen is the output is a list. A list is a flexible format for storing things in R. Well, one thing that I do in my naming convention is I like to name what the object is, like its format first, then I give it a name. So here it's a list, so I go list underscore Star Wars. If it was a data frame, I always use an M for data matrix. For data frames and matrices, I would do M underscore Star Wars. If it was a vector, I would put V underscore Star Wars. I find that this is a good way for me to keep track of what type of item I have that I'm working with. And I find that when I get into the more complicated problems, this helps me keep track of what it is I'm working with. I haven't seen this convention anywhere, but I find that it is a good way for the bigger projects. All right, so what is happening here is we're taking the data set Alderaan, which is stored in the list, and I'm taking the Tatooine data set, which is stored in the list, and I'm stacking them on top of each other into one data set. So you'll see here that I've got Alderaan. So we can see that or the Organas are from Alderaan, and here's Antilles. And then when I talk about Tatooine, there's these characters are all from Tatooine as their home planet. All right, now you'll notice that by doing this, the data set is sorted. This is an inefficient way to sort a data set. If you want to do it that way, the split and the combine will do it, but there are better ways. All right, so now what if I want to bind multiple? I want to stack multiple data sets. So here, these are, this is from the first movie. These are these planets appear in the first movie, and they have characters like Yavin 4 is also in the first movie, but the data set doesn't list anybody coming from Yavin 4 as their home planet. Here, this is Return of the Jedi, and so I'm binding these. So when I do dplyr, bind rows, I can stack multiple. I can keep on going. I can just have a whole bunch of data sets. As long as I have the same field of data and the same storage type for each of those columns, I can just keep on stacking them. And so if I do this, I can see that here's my data set. We've only got one character that's listed having its home planet as Endor, only one with Bespin, a bunch with Naboo. Okay, so what we can also do, and this is one of the nice features of dplyr, and this is one of the things that make lists very nice, is that I can actually run this on an entire list of data, so that if I have an entire list of only data frames, and all the data in each column has the same name, and each column has the same storage type for each of the data sets, then I can stack everything in that list on top of each other. So I can go ahead, I can take the entire list of the Star Wars data and pull them together. And we can see that I've got Alderaan, Aline Minor, Bespin, Bestine 4, and all the way down the list. Now, something that's important to notice about this, if I scroll up to the original data, you'll notice that I've got missing values. All right, when I did the split operation, all of my missing value ones were kicked out. So that's something to be mindful of if you're going to run the split command. So everybody that had a home planet listed in the data set is included here, and the characters are ordered by home planet. All right, well, now something about this is that if it's distinctly possible that if I'm stacking a whole bunch of data sets, I might not remember where an observation came from. All right, so if, let's say that the splitting field was not included in the data set when I did the split command, then I wouldn't have this feature here. I wouldn't have that field. So I wouldn't know which data set did R5D4 come from. Well, what I can do, if I put ID, so it's .id is equal to link to split data. So here's the name that I call it. The help documentation uses the word link, so I went ahead and used link in the terminology. You'll notice that this is linked to split data. What bind rows did, it said, hey, I'm going to take the name of each of the data sets in that list, and then I'm going to put it in this column. I'm going to name the column link to split data. And so then, boom, I've got this. Now remember, all of my missing values are gone because the split operation dropped them. So since this is all of the names of the data sets in that list, that is what's reflected here. It's redundant because this appears in each of the data sets. All right, now another option for stacking data is the rbind function. My opinion is that you should not use rbind unless bind rows gives you errors, which can happen. Sometimes it's just easier to use rbind. In general, I feel like it is the lesser function, it's slower, and my experience is that it's more likely to alter your data set than dplyr is. But there are times where dplyr will throw an error where rbind won't. And so then in my personal work, that's when I grab rbind. And so I'm just repeating what I did previously. Now here I'm going to go ahead and list out some names. So here, dparse level, that is dealing with either row names or column names. Here I can tell it to make row names true or false. So if I didn't have row names, it could go ahead and do that for me. And string is factors. So here, it can, if I had this set to true, it would go through and convert strings to factors, which might be quicker and easier for me if it's going to give me the output I want. But my experience is I generally do not want base R functions to do this for me. I want to do it manually. And factor.exclude is talking about excluding levels. So if I have a factor and they get stacked on top of each other, but they have different levels, this tells R how to handle that situation. And then here's our data set just like we had before. Now side-by-side appending is where I have two data sets and I put them together like this. So here, this is equivalent to having row position as an ID variable in a data set. So this is similar to a join where the row number, row position, is the ID variable. All right, so the two major ways is dplyr bind columns and column bind, cbind. And pretty much this is going to be very similar to what we've already talked about. In general, the dplyr version is better. It's faster. It's less likely to change properties of your data. My opinion, once again, is that you should only use cbind when dplyr gives you errors and it's just going to be faster and easier for you. This doesn't happen too often, but this can happen. Watch out for cbind to convert strings to factors. So remember, anytime I use a base R function, I always have to watch out for that. All right, so here's some data to generate as an example. So I'm just doing random number generation, and these are all, these are all ratio data. And here I have all integer data. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to make some column names. All right, so you'll notice that there's a space. Space in column names are bad. And then this is a special character. And that's a special character. Here I've got a space and it's a repeat. Here I don't have anything at all. There's no name. And then here, this is a reserved word. All right, so I really don't want any of these to be my column names. So these are not syntactically correct column names. I want to, these are column names that some functions in R will have problems with, and I'll be getting errors if I attempt to run these. So I want to, basically change the column names if I can. There are times that you'll be working on a project and you really need to keep your column names as they are, and then you have to kind of work things around, either make them syntactically correct, do your project, then change them, or keep them as is, depending on the scope of the project. All right, so here when I do bind columns, and this is the default setting, which is unique for the names, you'll notice that it takes the v space 1 and makes it into v space ... 1. And here, it takes the v space 1 that was in the second data set and makes that into v space 1 ... 4. So, because that's the fourth column in the new data set. Here, when we had this, all right, so this double dots is not syntactically correct, but triple dots is. So what it does, it tacks on a little dot to fix that for us. And then here, when I have my blank becomes ... 5 because it's the fifth column. And so 1 dot is not syntactically correct at the beginning. 2 dots is not syntactically correct. And then, but 3 dots always is in R. So that's something to be mindful of. All right, so if I use the default method of putting my data together like this, I can see how the column names change. So notice that V1 becomes V1 ... 1. Over here, this V1 becomes this. So it's ... 4. And you'll notice that the syntactically, or that the reserved name, if is a reserved name, because of if then logical statements, then this is something that's reserved. I can't use this as a column name, but since I put it on unique, R isn't really worrying about that. It's letting it slide for now. When I go to use this data set, some functions won't run this because I've got spaces. I've got a special character here, space, and I have a reserved word. So some functions will allow this data set to be passed in, some won't. It depends on which ones I'm using. Now, if I use a unique column name repair, so here I put dot name repair is equal to unique, same code otherwise, it goes through and it does the same thing. The default setting is unique. Now, the next one that I can take a look at is that I use the name repair of universal, and you'll notice that now that space becomes a dot, this hyphen becomes a dot. All right, that is similar. This space becomes a dot. That's the same. All right, so furthermore, you'll notice that this reserved name gets a dot in front. So now this is no longer a reserved name. So everything is working out. Next option is minimal. So here, what this will do, this will work with the names at the lowest interference possible. And this may be good, this may be bad, depending on what you're working on. So here I've got space, just like I did in the beginning, just like the original, just like the original. Here is the original. Notice that there is a quotations next to each other with no space in between, and then a reserved name. Now, there's also another option called check unique. That option did not run on my machine, so I did not include it in this example. It's somewhere in between unique and universal. And then if I do cbind, I can see that none of the names really change. Oh, so here it did var.5, but the others were left alone. And this may work, this may be a problem. After this, there are functions that will give me syntactically correct names I could run. All right, well, that's all I've got for you. Take care and goodbye.